Okay, so initially my plan was to have the stack of paper, and I was going to pass it around, kind of like what we usually do for illustrations, but just do one stack so that you guys could just have the opportunity to play that again. However, I apparently ran out of time this afternoon and didn't get a chance to cut up the papers. So, but how many of you guys have played illustrations with us? All right. So most of you guys know. Wow. Okay.
Ted, don't forget to have them sign the card.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk about that at the end.
What?
All right. Okay.
Sit down.
Yeah, let's.
Just later.
We've actually got cards in my office. If you guys want to write a note card to the back and send it to them or to anybody else, I'll bring them over.
Yeah, that too.
For the what?
The game.
Telephone?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Okay. Illustration. Okay. Okay. So, getting back on topic. All right. For those of you that haven't played, Illustrations is a game that we play where, like, if Kobe was to start it off, then Kobe would write a word or a phrase down on a piece of paper. He would then pass that to Kason, who would look at the phrase, put that at the back, and then try and draw the phrase. And then she would pass that to Weston, who would then take a look at the picture. He would pass it to the back, and then he would try and write down what he thought the picture was. And on and on and on it would go until it got to the end. And it becomes horribly mangled and nothing resembling what the original picture was. True.
Unless you draw perfect.
Yeah, if you're a really good artist, then yes, it works pretty decently. If you're not a good artist, like myself. Alright, so, moving on. Alright, so words matter. Shh. Alright.
Words do matter.
Yes. Alright, so, if I say the word mansion, what comes into mind?
Big house.
Big house, right?
Lots of them.
Alright, so in John 14:2, if you go to the King James Version, it says, in my Father's house are many mansions, right? And so if you think like most of us do today, this is your idea of a mansion. This is the Biltmore Mansion. And where is that, Abby? North Carolina?
It's in, no, it's in North Carolina.
North Carolina, okay. Alright, it's gigantic, it's huge, okay? And this is like the typical idea that we have of mansions, right? But when this was written in King James time, do you guys want to know what a mansion was?
A castle.
Apartment complex.
I don't know.
Yeah, the other one's kind of nice because if you're sitting there singing, I've got a mansion just over the hill. It's like, yay, I've got my own little mansion, yay! I've got my own pool, whatever. But that kind of changes the meaning of the song when you're sitting there thinking, I've got an apartment with a bunch of other people, and sometimes they smell, or sometimes they're loud, okay? It's not quite, it doesn't quite fit what we think what we wanted it to, does it? But I want you to consider something, okay? All right, here's what I want you to consider when it comes to this, all right? When you get to heaven, is the purpose of heaven just to sit there and have a little party of your own and just, maybe occasionally pop in, check in with God? No. What's the purpose of heaven? What's it supposed to be like?
Spend time with God.
Spend time with God. Huh? Spend time with God. Spend time with who else?
Rest of the saints.
The rest of the saints. Okay? So, realistically, this is actually probably a much more accurate idea of what it would be like in heaven because of the idea that the whole idea, that didn't help at all, okay. The whole idea of heaven is community, all right? And so if you're living in an apartment complex, you're in a much tighter community than you are if you're in a mansion. Because if you're in a mansion, yes, there are many rooms. But more likely than not, you can just sit there and say, I don't really want to deal with anybody today. All right? An apartment complex, you're in it with everybody. All right? So, the point here is that words matter. Okay? And so, as we go through this series for the next 3 weeks, the goal here is to not only make sure that we all understand the words that we use that we use in church, but it's also to make sure that we know how to explain that to other people. Okay? Because it doesn't do us much good if I can sit there and say, "Oh, we don't practice transubstantiation," right? Yes, exactly. If you're talking to somebody and they have no idea what that means, then they're just going to sit there and go, "Cool story, bro." I mean, I don't know. If I start talking to you guys about Arianism, raise your hand if you have any idea what that word means.
Isn't there like a god?
Nope. No.
Arianism.
Arianism. Talking about the air.
Nope. This is exactly my point. Now, okay. All right. Now, more likely than not, you guys are not likely to have a conversation with somebody about Arianism. But you are likely to have a conversation with somebody about some of these other words that we're going to be discussing. All right? So, first one, holy. What do you think it means? Okay. Maddie, do you mind writing that? I'm written.
I'm going to pass what I would say
All right.
is written.
Your handwriting would be better than mine anyways. Okay, so one with God, right?
One? Like
One.
number one?
Yes, one with God. All right. All right. Shh. What else do you think the word holy means? Yeah.
Set apart?
Set apart. Who's there? Okay.
Total devotion.
God.
Okay.
Forgiven.
Forgiven. Okay.
No.
You've probably heard the word holy before, or at least sang it in a church song once or twice. And for most people, this idea is really just connected to being a morally good person. So God is holy because he's morally perfect. Yeah, that is.
Hey, guys. Okay. We're really chitter, chatter, whatever tonight. We've got to start calming down, okay? All right. What else? What else comes to mind when you think of the word holy?
Devotion to God.
Devotion to God. Okay. DEVOTION.
It's okay that she doesn't know to spell.
She's blonde. She's blonde.
Okay.
Hey.
It's true. I gotta make a blonde.
Pretty sure I'm
Got some blonde in your hair too.
Oh, these are just natural highlights.
Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on what the word holy means? Okay. That's it. That's fine. All right. Thank you, Maddie. Okay. So, maybe. Go ahead and hold on to it. Okay. So we said that holy makes you think of being one with God, of being set apart, of being forgiven, of pure, of devotion to God. Okay? So, what does it actually mean? All right? If you go to dictionary, or the dictionary, I should just say dictionary. If you go to the dictionary, it says it refers to the divine, that which has its sanctity directly from God or is connected with Him. Okay? Another spot I found kind of suggested this: perfect, without sin, completely righteous. All right? So we've watched this video before. I want to show it to you guys again, though, just because it really is, I mean, the best example I've ever seen of the concept of holiness.
Is
Which
it a Bible
reminds me.
project?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Where's my cake go? Okay. Felt like I was pulling something out of Mary Poppins' purse. I mean, get here. Okay. All right. Here we go. Ready.
You've probably heard the word holy before, or at least sang it in a church song once or twice. And for most people, this idea is really just connected to being a morally good person. So God is holy because he's morally perfect.
Yeah, that is part of it. But in the Bible, the idea of holiness is even bigger and more rich. What it's really describing is how God is the creative force behind the whole universe. He's the one and only being with the power to make a world full of such beauty and life. And so all these abilities, they make God utterly unique, which is the meaning of the word holy. So a helpful way to think about God's holiness is by using the sun as a metaphor. The sun is unique, at least within our solar system, and it's really powerful. It's the source of all this beautiful life on our planet. And so you could say that the sun is holy. And you can actually take this metaphor even further, in that the whole area around the sun is also holy.
Yeah, because the closer you get to the sun, the more intense it gets.
Yeah, exactly. So that very power and goodness that generates all this life is also dangerous. I mean, the sun, if you get too close, will annihilate you. And in the same way, there's this paradox at the heart of God's own holiness, because if you're impure, his presence is dangerous to you. And not because it's bad, but because it's so good. And so the first time we see this paradox of God's holiness, it's in the story of Moses and the burning bush.
So God tells Moses to take off his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. And Moses covers his face in fear, and God says, hey, don't come any closer. It's intense.
It's actually that intensity of God's holiness that's explored even more in the stories about Israel's temple, which was the main place where God's holy presence was located. And at the center of the temple was this room called the Most Holy Place, the hot spot of God's presence. And whether you're an Israelite living in the land around the temple or a priest working right in the temple, you're in proximity to God's holy presence, which is dangerous.
Yeah, this is a problem. So how's it supposed to work?
Well, in the Bible, the solution is that you need to become pure.
So like being morally pure.
Yeah, and that's easy enough to understand. But the Bible spends a lot of time talking about another kind of purity, being ritually pure, which is a state where you separate yourself from anything related to death, like touching things like diseased skin or dead bodies or even certain bodily fluids. All these make you impure. And becoming ritually impure isn't necessarily sinful. What's wrong is waltzing into God's presence when you're in an impure state. And so that's why God gave the Israelites very clear instructions for knowing when they were impure, steps to become pure, so that they could go into the temple again.
So that's what the book of Leviticus is about.
Right. But it doesn't stop there. This idea keeps developing. So later in the scriptures, we find this really interesting story by a prophet named Isaiah. And he has this crazy vision where he's in the temple and he's right in God's presence. He's totally terrified.
Yeah, he knows the rules. He shouldn't even be in there. And he's worried about being destroyed.
And then this crazy creature called a seraphim.
Yeah, that is a crazy creature.
Totally. So it flies over with a hot coal, and then it sears Isaiah's lips with the coal and says something really weird. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for.
So this burning coal somehow makes Isaiah pure.
Yeah, it's remarkable, because normally, if you touch something impure, it transfers its impurity to you. But now here's this new idea, where you have this coal, this very holy and pure object, and it touches Isaiah, and it transfers its purity to him. Isaiah is not destroyed by God's holiness. He's transformed by it. I mean, the implications of this are just huge. But there's one more development, this time from another prophet, Ezekiel. And he has this vision where he's standing at the temple and he sees water trickling out from it. And then that water turns into a stream, and then it grows into a deep river that starts flowing through the desert, leaving this trail of green trees behind it. And then it flows into the Dead Sea, making everything fresh and alive.
So instead of becoming pure first and then going into the temple, here God's holiness comes out from the temple, making things pure and bringing them to life. What does it all mean?
So we don't know. until we meet this man, Jesus. And he claims that he's fulfilling all of these ancient visions, but in surprising new ways. So Jesus, he went around touching people who are impure, people with skin diseases, a woman with chronic bleeding, or dead people. And when he touches them, their impurity should transfer over to Jesus, but instead, Jesus' purity transfers to them and actually heals their bodies.
Jesus is like that holy coal in Isaiah's vision.
Right. And Jesus claimed that he was the human embodiment of God's own holiness, and that he and his followers were now God's temple, so that through them, God's holy presence would go out into the world and bring life and healing and hope. And so this is why Jesus described his followers as having streams of living water flowing out of them.
So this is our part of the story where we find ourselves now, but where's this all heading?
So the last pages of the Bible end with a final vision about God's holiness. And this time it's by a guy named John. And in his vision, we see the whole world made completely new. The entire earth has become God's temple. And Ezekiel's river is there, flowing out of God's presence, immersing all of creation, removing all impurity, and bringing everything back to life.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right.
I was like, what?
Okay. So yeah, when we talk about the word holy, when we look at definitions like this, it refers to the divine, that which has its sanctity directly from God, or is connected with Him. Or we talk about perfect, without sin, completely righteous. Who do you think we're talking about here?
Jesus. God,
Stop for a second and think about it if you need
Can you
to.
repeat it?
Okay, when we look at these two definitions, and it says, refers to the divine, that which has its sanctity directly from God, or is connected with Him, or perfect, without sin, completely righteous. Who do you think we're talking about here?
Jesus.
or the church.
People in general. Okay? Look at that. That which has its sanctity directly from God, or is connected with Him. God is God. God's already holy. Jesus is God. He's already holy. He doesn't need holiness transferred to Him. Okay? And that's the idea that is being expressed here, is this the focus of holiness in these definitions rests on us. And the main thing I love about that video is the fact that it puts the focus of holiness on God. All right? Why are we separated from God in the first place?
Sin.
Sin. And we're going to explore that word a little bit more tonight, but I mean, basically that as soon as we sin, we were no longer holy.
When you say holiness is connected to us as people in general, are you using it as a verb? Like, do we have to make?
I mean, you can't like make holy or anything like that. It's just just in the sense that it's connected to us. It's about us. These definitions are more about us than they are about God. They define holiness in relation to us more than they define holiness in relation to God. And the thing that I love about the way that they do that video is it focuses holiness where it begins, God. And that God's goodness, His holiness, is so powerful that that's what destroys people when they come in contact with Him if they're not holy. You look at the story of Nadab and Abihu in Exodus. You know, they sit there and they try and approach God's presence in the temple, well, in the tabernacle, and they didn't do it right. In fact, as far as we can tell from the clues that we do have in the text about more in the encounter, they were drunk and they were pretty much naked. And they were trying to waltz into the presence of God like it was no big deal.
Would that be the same for the Ark of the Covenant?
Huh?
The example of the Ark of the
Yeah. Uzzah, I think was the guy's name. When David is trying to bring the ark of the covenant back into Jerusalem, and they're not carrying it right to begin with. It's supposed to be a very specific set of people that are carrying the ark, and you're supposed to have people carrying it, not have it on a cart as David had it the first time. And so the cart tips over and the lid kind of comes off a little bit, and Uzzah grabs the ark to try and stabilize it, and he's struck down dead. Why?
They said not to touch it.
He's not supposed to touch it. All right? You're not supposed to touch the ark because the ark is holy. Because God spent so much time to make sure that his people consecrated the ark in such a way so that his presence could be there. And that's the whole big thing about Christ's death, is that through his blood, we're made holy. We can enter into his presence because we're covered by Christ's blood. We're made holy once again. Okay? And the other part that I really love about the way that they show that in the video is the idea of the fact that if under the old law you touch something that resembled death, sickness, a corpse, any of these other things, or the inner issues that went on with sin, you became unclean. And the problem with that became is that if Kobe was okay, but I was suffering from leprosy, and I just went, "Hey, Kobe, how you doing?" I've now transferred my uncleanness onto Kobe, and now he's going to go, "Oh, man, now I got to stay away from people, and I got to go through all these, purity things because now I'm unclean." And the wonderful thing that they show is the idea that God is specifically trying to give us an opportunity so that Christ can come up to us. And when we have uncleanness, unholiness in our life, all those things that separate us from God, that he actually comes up to us and takes it away. And instead of it just transferring to him, he retains his holiness and it just transfers over to us. One thing that these guys point out in another video is if you go into the book of Leviticus, I think that's where it is. Leviticus begins with its conversation about God speaking to Moses. Okay? And God actually it says God speaks to Moses from the tent. So if God is speaking to Moses from the tent, where is Moses? He's outside the tent. He is not able to be in the presence of God because of his sin. And so Leviticus goes through this whole big process of establishing, okay, if you do this wrong, here's what you do. If you do this wrong, here's what you do. If you need to make this kind of sacrifice, here's how you go about it. If you can't make it this way, here's how you do it this way. All right? That's why Leviticus is so exact and precise in the way that it is. It's not the most fun read for most people, but when you understand what's happening there, it makes that story much more interesting. Because when Leviticus is over and it goes into the next book, it begins by saying God spoke to Moses in the tent. So God spoke to Moses from the tent in Leviticus, and then he speaks to him in the tent. Where's Moses now? He's able to be in the presence of God because God has established the way forward for people to be reunited with him. Okay? So, we know what it means. That's great. But if you were to go to somebody that doesn't go to church or anything else, and you were to sit there and say, oh, it's not we've got that phrase that we use. It's not about how good or bad you are, right or wrong, whatever. It's about holy or unholy, right? If you go up to somebody that has no church knowledge whatsoever, is that going to make any sense to them? So how are you going to explain the idea of holiness?
The sun.
The sun. The example that they gave of the sun? Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. It really is. And so that's a great way to start with it. Can you guys think of any other ways that you might explain the idea of holiness? to somebody. Yeah. Yeah. And that's in Isaiah. You can actually go to the Bible for that one and say, this is what Isaiah experienced. Okay? The key thing that we have to understand here is that it doesn't do us any good to be in here Sundays and Wednesdays if it doesn't give us a better idea of how to share that with the people around us. Okay? So yeah, the coal, the sun. Any other ideas on how you guys can share that idea, how you can describe holiness to somebody that might not know what that is?
We could explain it like you're watering a plant. You put the water in the plant, and the plant gets life. So, in a way, it's almost like God's pouring holiness on us, so then we have life. Yeah,
you can look at it like that. I think Paul talks about that somewhere because he talks about he's talking about the transformation that takes place, and that's a good point to bring up when you are talking about holiness, especially for somebody that doesn't have any kind of affiliation with the church, because if you just talk about God as a way to get to eternal life, is that a problem? Yeah, 50-50 shot. If you talk about God as just a way to achieve eternal life, immortality, life after death, is that a problem?
Yes.
Why?
It's more than that.
Yes, exactly. It's so much more than that. You can go to any religion and hear ways to achieve immortality or achieve life after death. But the thing about God is that he's not just concerned about getting you beyond this life. He wants you reunited with him. He wants you to be in a place where you don't have to worry about sin or pain or death or grief or any of that other nonsense anymore. And so when you're talking to people about holiness, it's important to remind them, like Jeff was talking about, this idea of transformation. That holiness isn't going to just mean that if Christ comes up to Kobe and says, "You're with me now," it's not like Kobe just, got that radiant face like Moses, but Kobe doesn't have to do anything. The idea is that when Christ comes to you, when you accept him, when you're washed in his blood, it should be activating this transformation within you. And the old you should start to fade away as that holiness takes over. As God's Spirit starts to work in you to replace your old self with the new one. All right? So you guys are doing great. That's awesome. So those are all really great ways to talk about it. So, all right. So, holiness, sin. All right. What do you think? What do you think sin means? Matt, you want to write again? We'll pull the board up for you this time. All right. What do you guys think sin means? No.
What's that poison? You just put a drop on a tree and it just kills the whole tree.
I didn't know about that.
Huh?
So there's an actual poison you can put on a tree and it'll just automatically kill it.
Poison in general?
Not like in 5 minutes. Like you just barely drop it, put up a little drop.
Is it like I don't know.
Okay, just put poison in quotation marks. Or tree poison. Tree poison. Yeah, just put tree poison in quotation marks. All right. We'll know what we're talking about. It's all right. Huh? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, swap the I.
Yeah.
Okay, I know I'm fine.
Yeah.
That's
all
right.
right.
Okay, my brain's not that
Holiness.
Impure. Okay, yes, impure. Huh? Disgusting. Okay.
Dirty.
Dirty.
I'll
Okay.
put dirty.
Stain on the carpet.
A stain. Okay.
Unholiness.
Unholiness. Okay.
Disobeying.
What else?
Disobeying.
Disobeying. Okay. Okay.
Not just God. Parents.
He's the best disobeying God. God goes back
True,
to
but
no.
however, someone. I was
No, that actually was right.
with you,
That was right.
Daddy.
Okay. Okay.
Daddy.
All right. We're gonna leave the list there. That's a good list. Okay.
Does that make it?
All right.
There's no mustache on you.
So
Do it.
now, let's talk about what it actually means.
Who's trash?
It actually works out great because this is going to work for a great object lesson right here.
You threw it, please.
All right, listen. All right. All right. How many of you guys have shot with a bow and arrow? All right.
Oh.
Now, do you know what it's called when you miss the target?
A miss.
You're retarded.
Wait, what was it?
Do you know what it's called when you miss the target in archery?
Miss.
Misfire.
Sin.
Sin. It's actually called sin. The ancient idea behind sin came about because of archery. Okay? If my target is the trash can, I'm going to try and hit the target.
Go for it.
Hey, don't things.
Okay? That's huge.
Sin.
Okay? The idea is this, is that the target is perfection. Okay? There's no way without God we're going to achieve that. There's just no way. If you go to the actual, there we go, got it. Oh, almost missed it. Okay, if you go to the actual definitions for sin, if you go to the dictionary, it says this, refers, nope, that went backwards. Okay, if you go, I think this is from the dictionary. If you go to the dictionary, it's transgression of divine law. Another definition is this, anything that goes against the will of God, actions, words, emotions, and thoughts. Hebrew and Greek suggest ideas such as missing the mark or failing, coming up short. Okay? And so this one in particular is a better idea for us because when you just talk about transgression of divine law, what kind of stuff comes to mind?
Well, like the actual law, like the.
Okay. What else? Transgression of divine law. What comes to mind? Okay. Alright. Now, if we go to this one, though, that says anything that goes against the will of God, actions, words, emotions, and thoughts, what comes to mind now?
Actions and thoughts?
Yeah. It's more than just, stealing. It's more than just, punching someone. Okay? This idea gets us closer to what sin really is, which is really anything that separates you from God. Anything that makes you miss that mark. And it's not just a matter of the things that you do. It's not just a matter of the things that you say. It's a matter of the things that you think. It's a matter of the things that you feel. And so if you feel jealous of somebody, that's sin. If you're angry with somebody but you never express it to them, is it sin? Especially if you don't express it. God's whole idea in the scripture is that if you're angry with somebody, you need to go talk to them. You've got to go work it out. All right? Even if that person is somebody that's hurt you on multiple occasions, and even if that person is still a potential, even somebody that's a potential danger to you, you need to go to them and say, this hurt. going to forgive you. It might take a while, and I might need to step away for a little bit because I can't allow you to hurt me or my family again, but I forgive you. All right? So how do we describe the word sin to other people?
Like the bottom.
The bottom one? Okay. Anything in particular in the bottom one? Just use the whole thing? All right. Anybody else? Any other ways that you might express the word sin to somebody that might not understand exactly what that means?
A disease.
A disease.
Like, if you touch a disease, it's gonna spread to you, and like it's gonna spread to others when you sin, because it's not just one thing you do.
Yeah.
So we know what that tree poison was.
Okay.
Disobey.
Huh?
Disobey.
To disobey. Okay. Yeah.
Ooh, about one. It's like whenever the oh, wait, I could put that, you know?
Well, I mean that really gets at the heart of sin in the first place, especially from the garden, is disobedience, rebellion against God.
So like a copycat of a someone. If you do something bad and then someone copies you, they're sinning too.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. One last one. Well, apparently I didn't put in the animation stuff, but that's all right. Okay. Fleshly nature, sinful nature. We've talked about that a lot in class. All right. So when we talk about sinful nature, what besides looking here on the board, what thoughts have come into your minds in the past when we mentioned the idea of sinful nature or fleshly nature?
When you do something wrong, it's not pleasing to God.
Okay. Yeah, and the real idea behind a sinful nature is this idea of original sin, that this is hardwired into us basically at this point. You know, let's see here. Aiden, why'd you do that?
Here, it didn't have a blue marker. What a blue marker?
Green mark.
Aiden, why'd you react?
All of it.
But you did. Why? Okay. Well, I mean, you could have just let it hit you. Exactly. All right. It's in his nature to respond.
Yeah, look.
Yeah. Yeah, look.
All right. No, let's end the example there. All right. All right. So it's hardwired. All right. It's hardwired into us of sin. Okay, and that's the idea behind sinful nature. All right, is that it's this idea that we lack holiness in general without God. Without God, it just doesn't exist. It's because of sinful nature that we do get anger, or we might get jealous, or we might lust, or anything else that happens in this world. It's because of original sin. So do you guys have any ideas on how you might express that to those around you? That one a bit tougher? It is. Sometimes you can't always explain something to begin with just by talking about it, okay? Sometimes you really do have to use those other examples, okay? I threw a marker at 8. I tried to throw a bag of goldfish into the trash can. We watched the video, okay? Sometimes you might need something. Sometimes you might need something to kickstart the conversation. Okay. The idea is essentially to use whatever that is to lead back into the actual explanation of what's going on. Okay. The sinful nature thing, that's definitely a little bit more tricky to explain than just holiness or sin. But the basic concept here is, it's built into us. It's who we are. When we talk about how God transforms us, we're not just talking about God makes us this white, being or anything else, as being of light or anything like that. No, it's this matter of God works through His Spirit to change our nature. I'm not I can lose my temper pretty easily. I have an issue when, especially because I've worked in customer service before, if I go to somebody as a customer and they start interrupting me a whole lot, anger Ted's about ready to come out, okay? On the night. Okay. And here's the thing is that anger is something that I've worked on through a lot of years, and God's Spirit has definitely helped me with that, okay? But my nature is, it has anger built into it. That's part of my sinful nature. And that's something I'm pretty much always going to struggle with. Each of us has something that we struggle with. But you don't have to sit there and allow that thing to continue in your life. And that's the great thing about God's Spirit being in us when we put Him on. Is that His Spirit comes on and allows us to change from unholy to holy. It allows us to change from the sinful nature to God's. So, Sunday, we won't have class because most of us are going to be out to encounter. So you can either go into the auditorium or you can go into the Young Marrieds class, I think is where some of them have gone to. And then there won't be an event Sunday night either. There's the Ministry Alliance thing here at the building at 6. So there's that. So if you're going to encounter, we need to leave at 2 o'clock. So we need to be here at 1:30 if you're going to leave with us, so we can get the van loaded and get out on time. Okay. Hayden Hudson, do you guys have practice on Friday?
I do.
You do? Okay, so you'll be riding down with Aaron.
All right.
Okay.
If I do, it's in the morning, so I'll be there.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yep. Nope. Didn't work.
Fantastic, sir. Right to his hand.
Okay. Okay. If you're going to encounter, please, please, please make sure to dress warm. Unless you're just, one of those people that's crazy and whatever. Then, but please dress warm. It got freezing cold out there last year, and I know I'm not exactly the strongest person when it comes to cold, but whatever. Dress warm. All right. Last 2 things. If you haven't already, I need you guys to fill out your information on the sheet for Elsie. Also, there's some cards on the table there, so that we can say thank you to the people that have helped fund the hotel stay and all that for Encounter. So, sign those, sign Elsie's sheet. That's it for tonight. Love you guys. You're awesome.
Okay.
Hey, I got it for you.
You're on the wall.
Can I have a hot candle?
Okay.